Okay, so you know how sometimes you just get curious about like drug tests, like
Right.
how long can they actually find something? And what about those stories you hear about false positives? It's wild.
Yeah.
So today we are doing a deep dive into PCP
Right.
to understand how it's detected and debunk some myths along the way.
Yeah. PCP or phencyclidine, it's got a kind of notorious reputation, and for good reason. It's a powerful hallucinogen. And unlike medications that are produced, under controlled conditions, all PCP in the US is made illegally.
Wow.
What makes it kind of tricky is that the detection time isn't like as straightforward as you might think.
Right, because our sources lay out four main ways to test for PCP:
Hmm.
urine, blood, hair, and saliva.
Right.
What surprised me was seeing how long some of these tests can pick it up. Like hair analysis can detect PCP for weeks, sometimes even months after use.
Wow.
That seems wild compared to, like, say, a urine test.
Yeah. Well, it all comes down to what each test is kind of looking for. Urine tests are really common because they're pretty easy to administer and they can find traces of PCP for a few days up to a couple of weeks. Blood tests, on the other hand, those are more for showing very recent use, like within hours, but that window closes quickly.
So blood tests are more like a snapshot of right now,
Exactly.
while urine tests have a slightly longer memory.
Hmm.
What about hair tests, though? What makes them such long-lasting record keepers?
Well, think about your hair like a timeline.
Okay.
As it grows, it captures these traces of substances in your system, including PCP. So a hair analysis isn't actually looking for PCP itself. It's looking for the traces it leaves behind as your hair grows. That's why it has a much longer detection window, up to 90 days, according to this one study. And then you've got saliva tests, which are kind of like a middle ground between blood and urine in terms of detection time.
Okay.
Anywhere from like minutes to a few days. They're often used because they're considered less invasive to collect.
Oh, 90 days. That means even a single encounter with PCP could have implications weeks later, especially depending on what type of test is being used.
Yeah,
Talk about food for thought.
exactly. And that's why understanding how these tests work is so important.
Wow.
PCP, unlike some substances that people might think of as purely recreational,
Right.
often has very unpredictable effects.
Okay, so we've talked about how these tests actually work,
Right.
but our research also mentions that things like your metabolism
Yeah.
and overall health can play a role
Right.
in how long PCP is detectable.
Yeah.
Is that really true?
It is.
Like, could someone who's like super active clear it out of their system faster
Right.
than someone who, say, enjoys the occasional jog around the park?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really shows just how much individual variation comes into play here.
Right.
Because you see, metabolism, it isn't just about, how quickly you can burn calories.
Right.
It's about how your body processes everything,
Okay.
including things like medications and substances like PCP.
So it's not as simple as like faster metabolism equals faster out.
Exactly.
Okay.
While someone who's incredibly active might process things a bit faster,
Okay.
it's not guaranteed.
Right.
Factors like age, your body mass, genetics, even your hydration levels
Wow.
can all impact how your body breaks down PCP.
Right.
There's just so many variables.
That makes those stories about false positives even more interesting.
Right.
Are those actually a thing?
Yeah.
Or just something people say?
It's a real thing.
Really?
Yeah, it's a real thing.
Because honestly, hearing all this makes me wonder if those tests are really as foolproof as we think they are.
Yeah.
You know?
False positives definitely happen, and it ties back to what we were talking about with individual factors, especially medications.
Okay.
Our sources actually list a few common medications that have been known to trigger these false positives for PCP on certain tests.
Wait, are we talking about really obscure medications here?
No, not at all.
Okay.
We're talking everyday stuff like doxylamine. It's found in over-the-counter sleep aids.
Oh, wow.
Or dextromethorphan. That's in a lot of cough syrups.
Oh.
Even ibuprofen, like your go-to for a headache, is on that list.
Hold on. You're saying my nighttime cough syrup
Yeah.
could lead to a false positive for PCP?
It's possible.
That's a little unsettling.
It is. And it highlights just how important it is to be aware of the medications you're taking and how they might interact with other things. And this is really crucial if you're ever in a situation where you're being drug tested. Be upfront about everything you're taking, even vitamins and supplements. Transparency is key.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So we've got all this information about detection times, individual variations, and the possibility of false positives.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, but I'm also getting a bit nervous.
Yeah.
For someone listening to this right now, what's the big takeaway? When would someone even be tested for PCP in the first place?
Yeah, you're right to be asking that because, like, knowing when this kind of testing might happen is key.
Right. Our research points to two main scenarios where PCP testing comes up: medical settings and employment screenings.
Yeah, and those are two very different situations with, different implications. On the medical side, doctors need to know what's in a patient's system to treat them properly, especially in like an emergency situation.
That makes sense.
Mm.
Knowing someone might have PCP on board could like completely change how a medical team approaches their care.
Exactly. And to be clear, PCP isn't some harmless party drug like some people might think.
Right.
The effects are often like extremely distressing and even dangerous.
Yeah.
We're talking paranoia, hallucinations, aggressive, and even violent behavior, sometimes directed at themselves. It's
Yeah.
serious stuff.
Definitely not something you want to mess with. On the employment side, I can see how certain jobs, especially those involving safety, might want to screen for drug use.
Mm.
But where does informed consent kind of fit into all of this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because employment drug testing is a complex issue, like legally and ethically.
Right.
It varies from state to state, industry to industry, even company to company.
Wow.
That's why knowledge is power. You have the right to know what you're being tested for, how those results will be used, and what your rights are if you have concerns.
It's a great reminder that we're not powerless in these situations.
Exactly.
We have a voice and we have rights.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to ask questions and advocate for yourself.
So if we're going to wrap all of this up, what's the big takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that behind those test results, behind the statistics and the science, are real people.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that when we're talking about something like drug testing, which can feel very black and white.
Right. But as we've seen today, it's anything but. There's a lot of nuance here.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into PCP and its complexities. We hope this episode has given you some food for thought and maybe even empowered you to ask more questions. Remember, knowledge is power, and in this case, it can make all the difference. Until next time, stay curious.